Hey
Hi,
everyone, how you guys doing?
I
Hey
am doing
Julius,
good.
it's nice to see
Hello.
you.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah,
Happy,
so we
happy
have a
Saturday.
yes, and we have a very exciting event today. We're gonna have our speaker from a director of engineering at Netflix. He's gonna have a lot of exciting things to share with you guys. And yeah, we see there's already quite a huge crowd over here. But yeah, let's start with self introductions first. So yeah, maybe Julius, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure, yeah, I'm
Mhm.
Julius. I am the chapter lead of Singapore Google Developer Group. And Wayan?
Yeah, hi guys. So I am the one of the guys in GDG Cloud Singapore. So the sister group of GDG Singapore, and yeah, that's me. I'm Nguyen.
All right, let's get into it.
Yes. So yeah, welcome guys. This is an event that is organized by GDG Singapore. But of course, yeah, the event is open to everyone, like not just within this region itself. I mean, hi if you are also attending from this event from like another country around the world. So we're very excited to talk to you guys, to see you guys, and also to share what our speaker have installed with you today for us. Yeah. So make sure that if you like this content, like, share, subscribe our content on YouTube on our YouTube channel, and of course, let us know. Like later, we have a feedback form as well. You can let us know in regards to any comments that you have. And so, just to give sort of a highlight on our future, our incoming events to come. So we have one of our next event where our speaker is a director of privacy at GitHub. So again, another big figure who's going to be discussing with us in regards to a topic, the future of data transfer. So yeah, I mean, watch out for the event. If you are not yet subscribed to, or rather not joined the meetup group or our YouTube channel, for example, you can actually go to the meetup group. You can see all the different events that we have in store over there. So yeah, and yes, for GDG Singapore, GDG Cloud Singapore, I think every single year, in fact, any GDGs around the world, there's always this one big event called DevFest that usually occurs at the later part of the year. And I think, yeah, even in this case of this situation where we have COVID-19, but rest assured, there's definitely going to be things coming along for us. So yeah, more details to come. We'll be sharing more details as we release it in the coming months. So yeah, watch out for that. And as always, between all the chapters in GDG chapters in Singapore, and the GDG Singapore, GDG Cloud Singapore, we're always looking for people to step up to share their knowledge with the community. If you are working on some project, it doesn't matter whether it's a big event or a big project or a small project. As long as it's something that you are passionate about and you want to share with the community, or if it's just an idea you had on the side, do feel free to send in your ideas. You can see the link over there, bit.ly GDG So do submit in your ideas, and we'll look into it and keep in touch with you to see if we can get you on as a speaker in one of our events. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier on, yeah, that's we have our meetup group as well as our YouTube channel and Facebook page. So meetup page itself is very important because it's going to have all the events that we host. And if you sign to a group on our meetup page, you'll actually be able to stay in touch with, or rather, get the upcoming events to come. So what's the next date of all of these events. And yeah, Facebook page, usually we post a lot of updates there as well.
All right. So as you might know, over the entire year so far, we have been poor as a church rat. But now finally we found a sponsor, which means that there will be some giveaways at the end of the event. We have some really kind people from Hubble, which we are sucking money from. Hope they continue to sponsor us. So just by way of background, as with any sponsor, we talk about what they do and their hiring stuff. So this is a bit of a plug for the company, and we're kind of doing it for them. So Hubble is a end-to-end construction solution whereby it kind of tries to digitize the entire construction life cycle. It's a Singaporean company, and so far, as you might know, Singapore has been hit quite hard in the construction industry by COVID-19, and so Hubble has been working extensively with the Singapore government to help restart the construction industry. So which means that it's going to work with, hundreds of thousands of construction workers, construction companies to help get business running again. So that having said, they are looking for a lot of positions. Software engineer, QA, UI, UX, in biz dev as well, sales, PMs, product delivery manager, marketing. So if you have friends, if you're looking for, place to, be your second home, please go ahead and send your resume to talents@hubble.sg, and they're going to get back to you. Super cool. All right. And now, without further ado, let's bring in the big guy from Netflix. Bruce, take it away.
Oh, hey. Yeah, hey. How's it going, everyone? Thanks for joining Saturday morning. It's Friday evening for me in San Francisco. So I'm based in San Francisco. I live in San Francisco. Netflix is based in Los Gatos. Today I'm going to talk about full cycle people leadership. I'll go through the slides pretty quickly because I know, we have a lot of Q&A questions. So I want to start off and talk a little bit of our team. I think some people might be interested in knowing how Netflix is constructed. So this is a high-level overview of our product organization. We have client or UI, product management, backend, data science, biz dev, creative, platform partner, CDN, and InfoSec. The org that I'm in is called PES, or Product Edge Systems. It used to be an organization called Edge Engineering. When we consider the front door for Netflix, we recently, last year, split up the group where some of the sort of more repeatable functions moved into platform, and then PES stayed in the backend engineering group. So here, PES is broken up into three major areas: API systems, which is the team I run, playback systems, and access, identity, and management. So if you think about when you open up the Netflix app, when you open it, identity kicks in to make sure that you are the right person. API system handles all the discovery. So when you see the videos, what we call the Lolomo, or the list of videos, you discover through search or whatever. Then when you play back, you have the licensing, the tracking, and all that stuff. And eventually there's the CDN that actually delivers the videos. My team is broken up to 13 people between two orgs, DNA API, which is the consumer side, and Studio Gateway, which we're going to call BFG, and that's on the studio engineering side. Just kind of high-level consumer architecture, how it works is we have all these devices coming in from the left side, so Android, iOS, Roku, TV, Xbox, whatever, comes into Zool, which is our central gateway. Then it goes into this Titus container engine, which runs no-cork services that then connects into DNA API. And so all these services run to support each of the UIs. And then basically the API, DNA API fronts effectively the entire mid-tier service ecosystem for Netflix. There's some other services like the Playback API that services other mid-tier services, but we're one of the biggest APIs at Netflix. We typically handle about 1 million RPS, so that's 1 million requests per second. So pretty big scale team, and really only 9 of us, so it's pretty cool. The other side, which I think is actually really interesting and fascinating, is the Studio Edge architecture. And some of you may not know that we actually have over 70 studio applications that help deliver our pitch to play process. So think about when you pitch an idea all the way to playback on Netflix, there's all sorts of different apps that enable it and make it happen. And so our team runs what we call the Studio Edge architecture, or parts of it. This is a federated GraphQL API with a unified API for the entire studio data representation that's actually federated out to individual domain graph services that are owned by individual studio engineering teams. And the gateway and the registry is owned by my team. And we're pioneering federation with Apollo, which is the commercial company supporting GraphQL. And from what I understand, don't quote me, I mean, from what I hear, we have the largest federation out there with over 50 services behind a single GraphQL edge. Now, I know Facebook has a giant graph, but that's sort of in a very big monorepo. I think they call it www. So what's the challenge? So I started in January 2020. As you can see, I have 2 huge domain areas. I was trying to build rapport with 11 team members, building rapport with my PES management team. I had a steep ramp up of Netflix technology structure, tons and tons of docs. Netflix is known for its transparency. There's so much information. Lots of partners meeting. If you look at sort of where we sit in the ecosystem, we aren't a product team, but we orchestrate across all the product features. And so it's a lot of partner meetings with front-end teams, back-end teams. And then I had 2 openings. And, I basically had these 3 big challenges of, understanding my team structure and understand the team, working with my partners and wrapping up on the technology and what we're trying to do. And then the third is trying to hire all at the same time, right? And so kind of the challenge that I ran to early on is that I was trying to hire and I didn't really know who I was hiring for. We had an opening, we had a job rec. We sourced a lot of candidates. I talked to a lot of people, and I wasn't quite sure what to pitch. We have the general pitch, but what is the person going to work on? Where are we trying to go? What's our vision for the next 2-3 years? And it was really difficult early on, and I struggled a little bit. And so there was all this pressure to like hire, and then also do one-on-ones with my team and try to understand what my team is doing. And so like I really struggled with like dealing with this, right? And so what happened is I hired 2 people, and they actually all started at the same time. If you saw earlier in the chart, Breland and Antoine just recently joined the team. I wrote this onboarding guide for them. And what I realized when I wrote the guide is like, hiring and onboarding is really just one of many steps to managing a team, right? I've been an engineering leader for about 15 years, all sorts of different startups, smaller teams, teams as big as 60, current teams 13. And I realized like there is this life cycle where, there's a complete picture that I have to really understand sort of how you would build and construct and iterate and evolve the team, right? And so that's where sort of this idea of this life cycle came in, and what I call full cycle people leadership. And so there's 4 major phases, right? There's the design, which is what I consider kind of the vision and sort of the makeup of the team and deep understanding of what is in the team today and all that stuff, right? And so I'll show you, so what are the team strengths, right? Where are we going? What's the vision? What's missing? What's an additive hire look like, right? And so we talk about when we hire someone, we want them to be additive to the culture. We want them to bring in their strengths and bring in a new dimension into the team. And so these are some of the things that I have to consider when designing the team, right? And the second phase is really hiring recruiting, which I think most people understand what a manager or people leader's job is, right? And so this is like, what's your pitch? Are you clear who you're hiring? What skill sets are you looking for? What is your consistent interview process? How do you screen people? How do you technically screen people? What are the stages? What are you trying to get from the individual interview stages? Who are the people interviewing? Are they trained? There's all these aspects of the interview process, which is really important to hone in and make right. And then the last thing is when and obviously there's a lot of things in here. I'm trying to kind of keep it quick. And then how do you determine fair compensation, right? Netflix has this top of personal market philosophy, which is that we hire and compensate at the top of market for your personal market, which can be a challenge for figuring out what that means, especially in this environment. The third phase, or sort of the third area or pillar, is onboarding and training. So how easy is it for new members to onboard, right? when Brille and Antoine started, what does it look like for their first day, first week, first month, first quarter, first year, right? What we call it is their journey, right? And how do they learn? But when I was writing this onboarding doc, I realized, why don't we have a journey for everyone else? Why do we only write this for the 2 new people? As you saw earlier, API systems has a really big scope. So how do we ensure all the team members are trained and understand what's going on, right? And so that's the other thing, is how easy is it for existing team members to gain knowledge? And then are we built to be scalable as a team? What happens if someone is on vacation? What happens if someone leaves the team? Are we really ready to handle that? And finally, growth impact, which is really kind of understanding what is the impact plan for each of the team members, how will they grow, how will they make an impact at Netflix and the team? If you're running a team, how do they make an impact for your company or your team, right? How do people want to grow, right? I think I saw one of the questions earlier is like, what do you do if someone's quiet? What do you do if they're introvert? Like, that's the thing. You can't just assume everyone wants to do a startup. You can't just assume everyone's going to want to present and talk and have opportunities. You have to really understand what they like and what they want, and what is the space that they're really interested in, right? And is there room for that, right? They might want, I had one team member who wanted to be a manager. And the question is, do I have an opening for a manager? I may, but is he the right person for that role, right? And then finally, how do you deal with exiting people fairly? So this is obviously the part that is difficult to talk about and is difficult to think about. But if you have to exit someone from the team and because they no longer fit, are you doing it in a fair way? Have you been giving them continued feedback? Are they surprised? And how to look at this is, how do you make sure that the team continues to thrive, and also make it fair for the existing team member, right? If they're not fitting in the team, or maybe you don't have the ability to train them and build them up, it's really not fair to them to continue to let them suffer. And so you have to really think about, how do you exit them in a fair way? And so that's kind of like a really quick high level of the 4 areas. I know I went through this super fast, and I kind of did that on purpose because I want to leave a lot of time for questions. And so I'll turn it back to you, Julius.
Cool. Thank you so much, Bruce, for sharing. Yeah, that's Wayne. What do you think? Do you wanna go ahead with the Q&A?
Yes, definitely. I think there has been like a few questions already. I think we also received quite a number of questions from our participants, and I think definitely we can start off with those questions. So let me bring up our questions. So as I think as mentioned earlier on, like if you have any questions, please feel free to post in the live chat. And so I think to start off on today's discussion, I think one of our more interesting questions that our participants have posted to us is this. So what is the recommended approach for people managers, especially in any type of companies, to keep their staff motivated at all times, especially in this COVID-19 situation, where most people are also like working from home mainly?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a difficult question, because it's already hard enough to motivate people in a normal circumstance. And then you apply COVID-19, shelter in place, you apply all the pressures and concerns. And as some of you know, America is also facing a time of great conflict with its people. And obviously, some of that is happening also in other parts of Asia as well. And so there's just a lot of stuff going on, right? And so I think how I start, and I always start, is really go back to the kind of concept of caring, right? Get to know your team, understand them, understand them as people, understand what their concerns are, what are they worried about, what's bothering them, right? The worst is when you have a one-on-one, and I'm sure some of you people managers have had it, where you just say, how's it going? It's like, fine. And then the one-on-one's over. And it's like, that's not good enough, right? You really have to build that relationship. And it's not easy. I mean, I have several team members who are very quiet and is not as open as I am in talking, right? And so you can't expect that. And so really building the relationship, building the trust and empathy to really understand what are their concerns and how you can help them, right? There's this concept of a leader should be a servant leader, right? Your job is to enable your team to be successful. If you don't know what's going on with them, how are you going to help them, right? So motivation first starts with really understanding the person and building that relationship. Once you understand that, and once you get that, or you can get and make progress, then you can think about how to solve the problem. See, one of the biggest problems, and I face this, just so you know, is this active listening concept, right? Us engineers want to go immediately into solution solving mode. Someone says something and we immediately want to start solving the problem. But did you actually listen? Did you really listen to the problem? Did you ask follow-up questions? Did you dig in more? Maybe something else is bothering them. And I fell into this trap too. I had an engineer who I had a really difficult time connecting with. It took me a long time to figure out what the root cause was. And actually the root cause was onboarding. Is we never properly onboarded her. And she just felt really lost on the stack. And so that's an example of like, oh my gosh, like we totally failed that person, right? And so, you know, without understanding that and really digging in, how do you expect to motivate, right? And not everyone's motivated by the same things too, right? Some people are motivated by the big vision. Others are motivated by really hard technical problems. So you have to be really careful and understand the situation. You cannot apply a single formula for every single person.
That's definitely a very insightful answer. Thanks for that.
Cool.
So Julius, would you like to ask another question?
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Bruce. So we do have a few questions in the live chat now, actually. So I think let's go with a very quick one. Pinku was asking, will the slides we shared later, yes, there's a video recording, so you can access the YouTube channel of GDG Singapore. Please subscribe. We need subscribers. Thank you very much. All right. And then let's go to another one, actually. Invi has a question. So let me read it out loud. In the Corona, I think this is Corona, in the Corona and post-Corona era, is geographic location irrelevant if you're working in tech? What is Netflix's position?
That's a great question, because before Corona, Netflix position is you need to move to Los Gatos. We were very co-located, right? Like we would actually fly people for interviews, right? And we did have a second office in LA, right? Because we have a lot of engineers on the studio side, right? And we had some mix of engineers in sort of remote, but we are very co-located based. Like you have to be in Los Gatos, you have to move here. We'll compensate you accordingly, but you need to move, right? But since Corona, we've sort of like thought about how do we become more remote fluent, more remote sort of like inclusive, as we call it. And so that position has changed. I mean, we haven't obviously been as open as Twitter, where they said, hey, we're going to just, if you want to work remote, you can work remote, right? Facebook is like, okay, you can work remote if you're a senior engineer, if we interview you and make sure it works. Our position, which has been still being established internally, is really that it shouldn't matter, but it's really up to each leader to figure out what makes sense, right? So from the top level, we're setting the context that we want to be more remote inclusive, which means if you have team members who want to move away, they're not going to be in Los Gatos, that's okay. We might interview positions outside of the Bay Area or potentially even outside of the US. And if we offer all positions, right? Managers, engineers, directors, VPs, anyone, right? And so we have shifted quite a bit from before. And that was a pretty big change. You know, Netflix is really a global company now, right? We're in 190 countries. We make content, I think, in 30 countries, right? So we're trying to really be a truly global company. And so engineering, I think many will say, has lagged a little bit in this respect because we've been very Bay Area and LA centric. And I think that is slowly changing. Yeah. So I think I guess the long answer is, yeah, probably more and more so. But it's hard to let go, I'll tell you that.
Cool. Thank you so much, Bruce.
So I think we have another question. So like kind of related to what was just asked. So I'll put it in here. So what's your take on remote leadership? So I think in this case, since we were just talking about geological locations, do you agree with it?
So just so you know, like I personally in my personal career, I have worked in both co-located and hybrid and completely remote situations, right? And so I was pretty used to, as a startup, living in the fully remote mode, right? Is because as a startup, it's very hard to compete for talent. And you really can't be so choosy and say, hey, I'm gonna like hire only engineers in San Francisco, which is one of the most expensive like places in the entire world, right? And so I've always kind of taken the position, it doesn't really matter where you are, as long as you can do the job. But coming to Netflix has been awesome because everyone's in the same building. Like, well, I mean, we have like 5 buildings, but everyone's in the same area, right? Like all my one-on-ones for kind of the first time in my career for a while, or for several years, I could actually meet every one of my engineers, every one of my partners. Even though we're so big, everyone was actually in the office. So personally, and you ask our VP of product, product engineering, he says personally, he loves being in the office. But that's not good enough, right? Where are we going to find the talent? How do we source the talent? How do we really think about the future and where this is going? And so I think if you think of it as a bad idea, I think it's really a short-term thinking, is that you think really about your own comfort, right? You think about what I'm used to and what I like. But you think about what is the future of engineering and what is the future? Is it going to be practical for everyone to be in the same office forever? It's just not. That era is over. I tell people, just get over it. It's not happening anymore. Like, it's done. And Netflix is probably one of the last ones to really follow it. And I think to be a good leader is to really adapt to the situation. And if you're not able to hire talent and you're not able to compete with the Googles and Facebooks and Twitters of the world, you're not being a very good leader, right? So I think you have to adjust for what the situation calls for. And right now, we have to be better at remote leadership, period. It's just a skill we have to be good at.
So if I may extend that question a little bit, in the context of our like current situation where it has become mandatory to work with people in that remote sense, are there any tips you can give towards like how do you maintain, let's say, that personal relation you talked about before, beyond that goes beyond those one-on-ones with your engineers in this remote setting?
Yeah, and look, I really am not an expert at this, right? We're all learning today, right? Especially at Netflix, we have a lot of docs coming around on figuring out how to get good at this, right? And so I definitely don't want to purport to be an expert here. But some of the things we're trying to do, and I think what we're trying to get past is, in the beginning, we try to replicate the office environment, right? We kept on saying, oh, how do we collaborate better? How do we do whiteboards? What's the best, a Jamboard? And like, let's do, all these like replication of the physical environment. And that was the wrong problem to solve, right? You're just trying to replicate a thing that's very hard to replicate. And so we struggle with that, right? And I think what we're trying to get to is to think about asynchronous decision making. How do you get to the point where you can actually make decisions without everyone being in the same room or in the same Slack channel? So not just in the same meeting, but actually in the same Slack channel. Are you having decisions being made in one-on-one chats? Are you talking with people individually and then making decisions and not letting anyone know? Right? So that's the area that we have to get really good at, right? And we're not experts at this. There's like GitLab has stuff, Basecamp has stuff. There's a lot of articles about remote leadership. And really it comes down to asynchronous decision making. That is the heart of the problem, which is how do you decide? Because we're really addicted to the meetings, right? We have the meeting, we share context, everyone decides, all right, good. Right? But what if you're not in the meeting? What if you have to take care of your kid? What if you're busy? Does that mean that no decision can be made? And we're already a memo-driven culture, right? So we have everything written down. But it's like we have the memo as pre-read, and then we have the meeting to make the decision. And I think the big step is how do you start making decisions asynchronous? And we're not there yet. I mean, we're not even close, but we're trying to get there. So some of my teams is practicing this, right? We create a doc, and we literally write decision log. What did we decide? What did we agree on as a team? Someone who wasn't there, if they read it, they would immediately know, and they will get no FOMO.
Cool. All right, we have another question from one of the meetup attendees who had some prepared questions for us. Here's a question. I think it's a talk on its own. What are the qualities of a high-performing team?
Yeah. I think it really just comes down to impact, right? What is the impact that you're making for the team and the company, right? And for me, in particular, where we are, we're a high impact team already, right? Like we handle a lot of traffic. If Netflix is down, we might be involved. I'm not saying we're involved in all situations, but we're in the middle of everything, right? And so if you think about from a technology impact, we're there. But what about the future impact? We're at 190 million members. What happens when we went out to 500 million? What will that look like? How do we make impact there? And so for me, a high performing team really comes to the amount of innovation, trying, failing that they do, and the amount of risks and sort of things that they're trying to advance the company, right? So I think that is like ultimate goal, right? And I think Netflix has proven in its past that it just has this built into it, is that we've pioneered many new concepts. Chaos engineering was sort of like really pioneered here. We created the DVD shipping market, we created the streaming market, and now we created the digital studio market, right? And so we're constantly making these big bets, but then they're all derived from these small little bets that we make. And when we have an outage, it's just a very open, honest discussion. No one's getting blamed. It's just about learning and growing, right? So I think a high impact team for me is like, how are you making impact not now, but for the future, right? So there's that matrix, right? Urgent versus important. How much are you investing in the important? Yes, you have to do the urgent. You have to do that right now. If there's an outage, we have to deal with it. We have to be resilient, sure. But are you also innovating? Are you also growing and anticipating for the future? What happens when we double the list, the subscribers? So I think a truly high performing team needs to be actually able to do both really well. It's to execute basically, the day to day, but also plan and bet on the future. And so that's the key.
Cool, thank you.
Nice. Okay, let's see. So I think there has been like a recurring kind of a question that we have here. So but I'm gonna pin up. So this one is another question that people have been asking within our signups, and I think also within the chat. In fact, I see a question similar to that. So I'm just going to read off the question. What do you suggest to effectively handle different types of team members and characters? And I think in the chat as well, I think there's also people asking about like negativity within teams.
Right. Yeah. Here's the problem that every leader faces, is that I am an optimistic person, right? So I personally am very optimistic. I'm happy. I like betting on things. I like growing. I just, you can probably tell from my personality, right? So the problem is I gravitate towards those personalities, right? I have members of my team who is like that, who I can riff ideas and they're super quick and we have crazy ideas. We don't implement half of them or all of them, but it's just like really good discussion. The fallacy here is to only pick people like that. And so this is the funny thing. I'm going to pick on this word handle, right? See, handle is the wrong word. It's presupposing that people different is actually less than, right? It's like, how do we handle these different personalities? How do we like finagle them to become this guy or this person? And I think that's a real big danger. Yes, there are people who are not effective at their job. You have to think about exiting them. I'm not talking about that. But a quiet person versus a loud person, a pessimist versus an optimist, right? In Radical Candor, what they call a rock star versus a superstar, right? These people are different skill sets. You have to think about the makeup of your team. Who are all the people you need to have a complete team? Because look, I have many pessimists in my team, which is great. They bring up a lot of the hard problems. And you know what? As an optimist, I'm like, man, once again, you're complaining, right? But you know what? What would be the alternative? What happens if we get rid of all the pessimists and there's only optimists? And no one's telling you that you're doing a stupid thing. No one's questioning and pushing you anymore. No one's challenging your assumptions. That's actually a worse place to be. So I think the thing to recognize, it's not about handling different personalities. It's about taking the collective strengths and making a super team. Take the personalities and figure out how to use it. Focus on the strengths, not on the weaknesses. You know, something that I learned from a talk was we get really hung up on the weaknesses. How do I make this person do better? How do I make this person talk more? How do I make this person more vocal? Why? That person's not that person. He's just not going to talk more. Why would you make him do that? But you know what he's really good at? Is digging into a problem and solving it. So why not pair him with someone who's good at talking to people? And now you have a team that can do both. So why would you try to make people into different things? And I think that's the problem. We have to stop thinking that way. You have to think about what is the team able to do, not individuals, and focus on their strengths and build it as a collective, right? That's how so think about your characters, your personalities. What are they providing that maybe you're not recognizing because they don't fit the mold? The danger of fitting the mold is this is how you don't have diversity and inclusion. This is how you don't have diversity of thought. This is how you don't have a collection of ideas and really psychological safety. Is when you have all the same people, a bunch of happy-go-lucky people like me, it's not going to be a very good team. I'll tell you that. You know? Yeah.
That was a really good answer. Thanks.
Bruce, just a follow-up as well. You mentioned about radical candor and you mentioned about the rockstar engineers and superstar engineers. I think for the benefit of the viewers, would you be interested to cover?
Yeah. So there's two kinds, right? Rockstar is not like the rock, play in a band, but rockstar is like the Rock of Gibraltar, someone who's just solid and does their work and is just a machine. Like they're super talented, very strong. They don't want to go build a startup. They don't want to be the next Zucker. Like that's not what they're interested in. They don't want to climb the ladder. They don't want to be a people manager. They have no interest in that. They want to just build software and they love doing it, right? And why would you want to make them into something else, right? And then the superstars are people who are high growth, high impact. They want to really make a lot of change, big stuff. They maybe want to take on a bunch of stuff. They may want to grow in other positions. They want to take on bigger scope. They have a lot of sort of like that just kind of really high growth trajectory, right? And the thing is, you have to have both kinds of people. If you have an entire team of superstars, eventually you're going to have no team. Everyone's going to want to leave. And then who's going to actually work on the stuff? And you have the only rock stars, people who just stay and do the work, you may not be betting on the big things, right? So you got to get a mix of it. And so that's the rock star versus superstar is that. And that's where in Radical Candor, they talk about the mix of teams and understanding the different personalities you have and how to utilize it, not force one to be the other.
Cool. Thank you so much for explaining. And we are also seeing a few questions now about the one-on-ones. So I think I'll just bunch two of them together. So Ken was asking, as you scale your one-on-ones, also, the team size grows, right? So once you reach, say, 30 different members in the team, how do you have an effective one-on-ones?
Yeah. I mean, definitely you can't, I mean, at some point, you're going to have some form of leadership structure, either tech leads or managers or something, because you obviously think about it. If you have 30 reports, and let's say they're 45 minutes to an hour, your entire week, 30 hours is going to be one-on-ones, right? You're going to have literally no time to work, right? So you're going to have to think about what is the most effective thing. How many one-on-ones can you effectively have while you can still do your job? Because you also have to meet with your manager, you have to meet with your peers, you have to meet with your partners, you have to also work, right? You have to read docs, and then you have your one-on-ones. So there is a certain point where you can't do it all, right? And for me personally, you know, I had 11 team members and now 13, and I had home stuff and work stuff. I couldn't do weekly one-on-ones anymore. And so I switched it to bi-weekly, right? And try to space it out more. My manager, Pez, right? All of Pez, Philip, he runs that entire team. That's like 50 plus people. He doesn't have one-on-ones with all of them. What happens, he has weekly one-on-ones with his managers, direct managers. Then he has skip level one-on-ones every month or a quarter. Then he also is doing this group on-ones where he meets entire teams together, right? So you got to innovate a little bit and try out different things. I think as you get bigger and bigger teams, you're just going to have to scale back the number of one-on-ones. I think direct team members, you should have weekly one-on-ones at the best practice, or bi-weekly at the longest. But then if you have that many, you may have to start scaling yourself and saying, hey, maybe I don't have regular one-on-ones with this group of people, and I have this other focuser. So you're gonna, that time is precious, but you have to have one-on-ones. I used to run a team where I had a team of managers. I had manager one-on-ones, but then I also had skip levels. And then I would also encourage my reports to have one-on-ones with my boss, to have skip levels past me, right? And I found that the one-on-ones that my reports have with my boss are really informative. There's things that they say that they don't tell me, which I need to work on, but like, it's interesting what they say, and you learn how to be a better leader that way. So you have to really figure it out, what makes sense. You could try to do 30-minute, but honestly, when I had back-to-back 30-minute ones, you cannot have effective one-on-ones, because the amount of like context switching and to really provide the space to get into the mode of understanding, I'm talking to engineering A versus engineering B, and I remember what they worked on last week versus this person. To do effective one-on-ones needs actually time to think. And when I used to have these lots of back-to-backs, it was hard. I couldn't context switch. I was just having kind of crappy one-on-ones with my team. And so it's still a struggle for me. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Bruce. And I think we have a follow-up question regarding one-on-ones as well. So Akshata was asking, as you do one-on-ones, how do you make sure that, you get to know your engineers better, especially those that are, a bit more reserved?
Yeah, one thing I learned, which actually helps, is to be specific and ask in a negative. Something that worked really well for me is don't say, because I have a formula for one-on-ones. You can actually read on my GitHub page. And so I would say, hey, what energizes you this week? What's draining for you, right? I have these like ways to like trying to probe, right? And you frame it in a negative, like what's draining for you, right? But sometimes that doesn't work. And so you get specific. So one question that I asked that actually was pretty effective was, what's holding the team back? What's preventing us from being a better team? Or what do you think is preventing this project from moving forward? Why is this relationship so poor? So you may want to frame it in a negative plus very specific, right? But the ultimate is always to leave space, right? And I'm not perfect at this either, but you need to leave space for feedback, right? Is that, how one-on-ones go, like you catch up and you talk and then you do a sync up and then it's just like, oh, it's over. But if you get in the habit of, now we have feedback where I receive feedback plus I give you feedback, you've now created this cycle, right? And so you also need to have space saying this is the feedback time, right? And solicit feedback, and you got to build that muscle. It's hard because it's not comfortable, right? But I think you can try a specific and frame it in a negative. Say, hey, this project seems to be going poorly. What do you think is wrong with it? Right? Something like that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, so we have another question that our participants have sent in their sign-ups. So I'm just going to highlight this part. So I think it's a kind of a very...
That implies I'm old, right? It's like, oh, what? You're the old guy. What? What's stopping the young generation? No, sorry. I thought it was funny.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Just to read the question for the audience, yeah. So, like, what kind of leadership skills are lacking in this generation? But yeah, it does sound like us from a different generation.
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to say, right? Because this is too much of a generalization, right? I think it just depends. You know, like I need to see the leader, right? Like I think. Look, the leadership skills, I think is tried and true.
If I may restructure the question a little bit,
yeah, sure.
Maybe we could say, like, what do you think younger engineering leaders should strive towards? You know, what do you think they should?
It's not about you. It's not about you. No, seriously. That's the one thing you have to realize as a leader. It's no longer about you. It's no longer about your career. Stop worrying about what you need to get them to do so you can get your raise. It's not about you. If you really want to be a good people leader, you have to actually want your team to grow. You have to be okay for them to leave, right? You have to be okay with letting some of them go. So I think the skill is to realize, like, you have to be a servant leader. You have to be a humble leader. I read a book called Team of Teams by General McChrystal, right? So he sort of pioneered this concept of small teams in the military. You know, this is not something they did. They couldn't fight the terrorist war because they were so structured in this very big way. So they had to figure out how to make smaller and smaller teams and individual deciding teams, right? With transparency and individual decision making. But he said, instead of being a heroic leader, I used to be an engineer and I used to wake up in the middle of the night to solve the problems. You go from the heroic leadership to the humble gardener. You toil the soil. You figure out what's not growing. You have to get in the dirt. You're not in the spotlight anymore. You're not. But if your team shines and they execute and they do really well, ultimately it will reflect well on you. But you gotta stop thinking about yourself. You don't get into people leadership for yourself. I'll just tell you that. And I think too many leaders, including myself, went the heroic route, right? I was the engineer, previous startups. I was the CTO. I was the founder. I wrote all the code. I knew what was going on. So obviously I must be the best leader. No, not really. You actually could be a pretty terrible people leader if you're actually the strongest programmer on your team. That's why Michael Jordan is not a good coach. No. So stop thinking about yourself, you millennials.
Oh man, yeah. Thanks for the answer. We do have a little bit of, I guess, a deviation from it. What Cass was asking, most tech companies doesn't have a career path for shifting from technical roles to leadership role. So how have you navigated around this?
Yeah, that's true. I think the thing that's seen done well is really having two tracks. You have a technical leadership track and people leadership track. I actually only say people leadership because I don't want to say leadership. Like, my engineers are leaders too, right? And they need to have leadership skills. But people leadership is different than technical leadership. So I think the navigation really is, does your team account for this? Does it account for the fact that people leadership is actually a different career path than technical leadership? Your tech lead or best engineer does not automatically make you the best people leader. And I can tell you that. I was a really shitty people leader, all right? Because it was like, how was I actually trained to be a good people leader? just because I'm the best programmer, that makes no sense, right? That's not the same skill. So I think the real key is to recognize that these are actually two different skills. And so you have to really think about what makes a good technical leader versus what makes a good people leader, right? And so I think how to deal with it is to really just call it out. Don't have this, like, I've seen a lot of companies do this, and it's fine. Like, I get it. I've been in an org like this, is you do the, right, SD1, SD2, tech lead. Oh, now you can become a leader, a manager. That makes a little sense because sometimes tech leads sort of do both, sort of people leadership plus tech, and then you kind of give them a path to spring off. So it could work if the position is that they will split and they're actually two different tracks. And so I think teams that don't, like, people leaders don't code here. Like, we're not expected to code. We're expected to be very technical and be a credible technical advisor. So you're expected to be really strong technically. And I used to be a coder, but it's not like I need to be good at code and lead people. I think that leaves the false impression that you can do both well.
Okay, so we have another question. So I think maybe just to kind of a little bit of context switch a little bit, which I thought was interesting. Sure. So we have a question by Naveen, which is, are you aware of any leadership trainings that are actually useful, I guess, for ICs and managers? I think maybe this is also, I kind of want to point out, like just now you guys talked about the radical candor. So maybe if you have any tips towards things that, let's say, individuals can look out for in terms to hone their own skills in this area?
Yeah. So my last startup, it was a tier 1 VC backed startup called Shippo, and they were funded by Union Square Ventures. And Union Square Ventures, one of their cool things is they're really big on cohorts. Is like taking their different portfolio companies and doing exercises with them, right? So one thing I found really powerful was they actually hired a firm. I forgot the name. I have to look it up, but Life Labs. It was called Life Labs. Life Labs actually held in-person training, and I think they're doing virtual now, which is to train leaders, people leaders, right? To have effective one-on-ones, to be able to provide feedback, right? So like it actually went into the heart of like coaching. So I think the 4 were coaching, feedback, one-on-ones, and there was one more, I forgot. But it was like 4 key areas for every people leader to be really good at. And so that was a really good program because it kind of like really delved into the science of like, how do you coach? How do you ask Q-step questions? How do you ask follow-up questions? How do you actively listen and probe instead of go into answer mode, right? How do you have effective one-on-ones and give feedback, right? How do you do it in a way that doesn't make someone defensive, right? When you do this, I feel this, right? Don't blame them. Think about how you feel. This is how you talk to children as well, right? So there were techniques that like really taught you how to like coach and give effective one-on-ones and give proper feedback and stuff like that. And so I found that was pretty good. And I think, there's just, I think there's like books out there about leading teams, and I think Radical Candor is definitely a good one about how to like have one-on-ones, effective one-on-ones, and basically like be candid with someone, right? And so there are things like that. I think if you look for it, there's actually quite a bit of material out there. There's some blogs out there about how to like do one-on-ones as well. And so I think there should be some resources. And obviously, I know Life Labs operates internationally, right? So there may be other materials available in sort of your local region.
Cool, thank you. We have one question here from one of the pre-submitted questions. So the question was, when is the right time to start investing in building a team culture?
So in the very beginning. It's already too late if you're asking this. I really think it has to be in the beginning. even when you're a one-person startup, two-person startup, especially if you're a big company. I mean, I was in a session earlier and someone asked, hey, I have 13 engineers, I want to scale to 30. How do I have economy of scale? Culture. That's literally the only way you're going to do it. You can't do it any other way, right? So I think investing in it really means thinking about it. What do you want? Like, I ask some engineering leaders I mentor, I ask, what is your leadership philosophy? Very few can tell me what their actual leadership philosophy is. What do you believe in? How do you think about leading teams? What is your personal culture, right? Write that down and then figure out how to apply that to everyone, right? So I think the time is now and the time is always. And so one thing that Netflix is actually really well known for is our culture deck. But the thing is, the culture deck is ever evolving, right? We're trying to change it and make it better. There are things in it that wasn't always there. So the culture is also not static. So it's about continuing investing in building the team culture, right? And this goes back to what we talked about earlier with designing and hiring. This is what we're talking about, right? What is the team culture you want to have? What is the thing you want to promote, right? So my big thing is the learning culture. I want to give my team time to think and build the next great thing. And I want us to take shots and bet and have time to do it while still being able to build resilient software, right? That is my fundamental premise. So how do I create that? How do I create time in a roadmap? How do I encourage? How do I promote? How do I give positive feedback? How do I give negative feedback when someone doesn't take the time to do something? When someone doesn't give themselves permission and time to work on something, right? So I think you need to, as a personal leader, have your own thought process of what you want to have, right? Build psychological safety, build a learning culture, have all those things, understand what those mean to you, and then figure out how to apply it to the team and grow it. And then you have to like constantly, you know, when I said earlier about humble gardener, you can't just plant the trees and then leave. You got to constantly like deal with the weeds and pour water and then clean it up. And oh crap, this plant is killing this plant and I got to move this plant up. It's a constant process, right? So don't think of it as like, oh, I got to do this thing once and then it'll be good to go. It's never like that. It's a constant evolving process. And honestly, this is your main job as a people leader. If you're not building culture and thinking about it and thinking about how to make it really great, then you're really kind of not doing a great job as a people leader. That's like think about it, technologist. When do you think about technology? All the time, right? Like, so it's the same thing, right? Culture is analogous to architecture.
I have a similar question, but maybe this is more on the individual level, on like maybe individual contributors, team members. And this one actually, the first part of the question hits really hard, close to home for me in terms of like what's the take on grooming individual team members? Like how do you, I guess maybe to expand this a little bit, like how do you look into sort of planning out the scope or like their roadmap? Maybe, I don't know, like how long of a time would you also plan it for? Maybe along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's kind of similar to like planning on a product roadmap, right? You have really clear insight for the next week or two or a month. And when you start going 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, it starts getting fuzzy, right? So you got to be realistic that the farther the horizon, the less likely you're going to hit and be real, right? So it's good to talk about it. Like, hey, where do you want to go? What are you interested in now? And how do we get you there, right? So like, if you want to be a people leader, what do I need to do to get you there, right? So it's good to know that. But I think time horizons on an impact plan or like a growth plan or whatever is that, I just really don't think it's effective past a year. Because, you know, even a year, it's kind of long. You know, like, think about this. I wrote the onboard guide, which I called impact planning. Is the 5 firsts, right? First day, first week, first month, first quarter, first year. But the first year, even the first quarter, I'm not sure. I mean, I put some crap in there and like, I'm not sure it's going to happen, right? Like, I think it's going to happen, but I look at how they've onboarded in the first month. I'm like, oh, hey, maybe we could put you on something else. And so you gotta like with everything else, you gotta iterate on it. So I really think past even 1 quarter, the visibility of it is going to be hard. I think it's good to write it down. I think it's nice to say, hey, here's the target we're aiming for in a year, but you can't just put it there and then look at it a year later. That's the problem. The plan needs to be a continually evolving thing you talk about in your one-on-ones. Maybe not every one-on-one, but every other one-on-one or every month or something, you got to find a way to talk about growth, right? And so I think that's more important than the actual plan. I think you have to actually talk about how they're executing the plan versus writing the plan or the length of the plan. Is how are you making it real? See, the plans that I see is you write a plan and then you go back to your day job. So what's the point of the plan? I did that, right? I remember my last company, we wrote this big long list and then it's like, oh, now you got to go run your sprints, which has nothing to do with your plan. So it's like, I thought it was stupid. Like, how am I giving you time to actually execute on this plan? Are you holding me accountable? If I stuff your entire day, every week with a bunch of JIRA tasks, how are you going to execute the plan? So I think it's actually more important to make sure it's actionable versus the length of it.
Makes sense. All right, we have another question. This is every manager's favorite topic. Can you elaborate?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, can you elaborate about exiting people fairly?
Yeah. First, if they're surprised, you really messed up. If they had no idea you're letting them go that day, you really messed up. So the first thing about fair is you better have given plenty of feedback. And here at Netflix, we're supposed to give feedback all of the time, right? So we call it sometimes elevated feedback, where you're like, hey, this isn't just normal feedback. This is like your job is in danger feedback, right? And so, some companies have a formal thing called like an individual plan, improvement. I hate the PIPs. I hate PIPs. Personal improvement plans. Moment you're kind of over. That's my personal opinion. If you got to write a PIP, it's time to go. It's time to let that person go. But I think number one is, have you given them the feedback for real? Okay, I'll give you a very simple example. We had a tough situation in my last job with a pretty senior engineer, and they were reporting to someone, and they were talking. Then they put them under me, and I told them, and I gave them very direct feedback, and the person said, no one told me this. I'm like, what? We've been talking about this the whole time, and no one has told you that you've been performing poorly? No one has told you specifically you are actually struggling? It's like, that is not good. That's not fair. So number one is that person better know that you are giving them direct feedback and actionable things that they can do, right? So the fairness is about clear, actionable things, right? Like, it's like timely, clear, and actionable, right? Like, if you don't give it timely, that's terrible. If it's not clear and concise and to the point, it's not good. And if it's not actionable, it's not good either, right? So exiting people, I think, starts with, did you give them feedback? The second is, do you really understand the situation? Okay, so forget about the people that are just bad, right? You hired someone, they're not, and they're lazy, and let's just throw those people out. Let's just say you have the superstar guy, person, been doing great, all of a sudden starts slacking, stops checking in code, stops answering Slacks, is not present. The worst thing you can do as a manager is jump to conclusions. Why? A great engineer doesn't magically just start sucking. So the second thing is, how much support have you actually given that person? So first is, you give them feedback. The second is, how much support have you actually given them? Do you understand what support they need? Right? Like, have you given them all the tools to succeed? Right? The problem I think a lot of managers have is first, it's hard to give feedback, and I'm in the same boat. It's really hard to have that kind of comfortable conversation to say, hey, you're not doing well. The other part that's hard is figuring out what is the plan to help them, to understand them as a person. This goes back to the one-on-one, is building that connection, to care deeply about someone, to care about them as a person, to understand their concerns, and to actually understand what's impacting their performance, right? And if you don't know the root cause, or at least try to get there, that's also not great either. So I think if you're clear, you give them feedback, and you provide all the tools for them to be successful, and they still cannot do it, then I think it's time to let them go. And do it fast, because you're messing up the team. It's the worst thing because what I've constantly heard with people leaders, the biggest problem is, one, you spend the most time with your worst employees. This goes back to focusing on your team's weakness instead of your strength, which means all your time is on the bad employee, not on the good employees. Right? Two, your good employees know. Your good employees know when your bad employees are not executing. And if you don't make a decision and action, it will be bad. Right? They know. You could have people disenfranchised. They're like, hey, if he's not working, why am I working? Or they get cynical, like, why is he still here? And then the worst is, what if he gets paid more than that person? And it's like the whole cycle is terrible, right? So you gotta, the third is, he has to be timely. Do not let it linger, right? So one is, did you give feedback? Two is, did you give them all the resources? And three is, make a quick, decisive decision. Don't let it linger. That's how you be fair.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, so we have another question that our participants have sent in. So I guess this is kind of, maybe we already covered a bit here and there. And I guess for everybody, okay, maybe I'll just put a question first. I think this one, probably every single company probably has a different makeup in terms of the ideal team structure. But still, I think maybe just to ask if you have a generic look on like what you think the ideal team structure should be like.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting some water.
Oh, no worries.
I think the big thing is like size. It's like, is the team too big or have too much scope? So one of the things that my team is struggling with right now is that the consumer side is 9 people, and they have a humongous scope. And so it's really hard to plan, to have one-on-ones, to do anything. It's just too big of a team. I'm not able to focus. They can't have individual charters. They can't like have small team meetings. It's hard to try things because there's so many people to get approval on. It's just not built for speed, right? So I think the ideal structure to me is probably more centered around like team size, where like if you have a way to carve out the team's mission and charter and give them a really concise goal, you can have like a 3-4 person team do better than a 30-person team, right? But yeah, the exact makeup of the person, it really is, I can't give you because I don't know what it is. Like, what are you trying to do? What's the business you're trying to do? What's the features? It all depends on that, right? So maybe you should have all, iOS engineers because that's your charter. Or maybe you should have iOS engineers plus a DevOps engineer. That's going to depend on the actual team, right? It depends on the actual charter and what you're trying to do, right? Like scope. One thing that is
Oops, looks like Bruce is breaking off. All right, he's gone. We'll probably have to wait for a bit for Bruce to come back. Okay, in the meantime, while waiting for Bruce to come back, are you back, Bruce? Hey, the last 30 seconds, I think we lost you.
Because I hear you guys all the time. That was weird.
Yeah, I think the connection was messing up a bit. Okay, so I think while waiting for Bruce's connection to stabilize once again, let me just quickly share the two books that Bruce has mentioned just now. He talked about Radical Candor and Team of Teams. If we think that these are some of the books that you might want to actually grab and go and read, especially for managers or even like ICs. These are some things that you can definitely benefit from. Cool. Bruce, are you back? Okay, looks like he's not back. All right, let's see. Yeah, Jeff. So Jeff made a comment. Please repeat. All right, we're gonna repeat if Bruce makes it back. Let's see how his connection stabilizes. So while waiting for Bruce, I think that we can throw open a few comments from the live chat. We have the same guy, Jeff. Hey, man. We don't have the ta-da sound. Sorry, man. It didn't happen. Let's see how it goes next time around if we invite Bruce again. We have folks saying hi. Hi, Julius and Marian. Hello. So good to see you. Now we lost Bruce all the way. So this is what you do. Once your guest goes away, you kind of panic. Yeah, you kind of feel the dead air. That's how you make things comfortable for everyone else, but not for you.
Actually, just random question, Julius. You've read these books, right? Radical Candor and Team of Teams as well.
Yes, I do think that these books are quite useful. Radical Candor is one of those books that are extremely popular. That's extremely popular in the startup culture in Silicon Valley, as well as big companies like Google, Facebook. A lot of people are actually asked to read the book. Sorry, just to kind of fill in, Jeff. Good rescue. Yes, good rescue. Thank you so much, man. So one of the so there's this engineering podcast by a guy named Christian McCarrick. He's an engineering leader who often appears in engineering leadership events in Silicon Valley. So what he does is he interviews engineering leaders, and of all the books that engineering leaders recommend, Radical Candor actually goes all the way to the top. So the good thing is in Singapore Library, you can actually borrow the book and you can borrow the audiobook. The bad news is, so I just recently borrowed the book and there's like 30 people in line. So I think I'm going to read it next year. But yeah, so it's you can definitely purchase it in Amazon, or please don't pirate, but I'm just saying that you can get elsewhere. Yeah. All right, I think Bruce is almost back. I think Bruce is back. Hey, Bruce, welcome back, man.
Hey, it's really weird because I could hear his talk the whole time. It was really strange.
Why? It looks like it's not a Netflix issue. It's a AT&T or whatever your provider is.
Yeah, so I'm in a. So you guys know I'm in actually a office that doesn't have Wi-Fi. So I'm on a hotspot Wi-Fi. That's why. Yeah.
Gotcha. I think what now I lost the question. What was the last question?
About the ideal team structure. Let me see.
Can you guys hear me now?
It's a bit choppy,
Hello?
but let's try our best.
But yeah, let me see if I could get on my phone. I'm gonna try to go on my phone. Hold on.
Okay. All right. So in case Bruce drops off again, let's try to fill in the dead air. Okay. Okay. There's a question for me. Oh my God. I think I'm getting famous. So Ken's question was, one of your takeaways from either of these books. What are my takeaways? So radical candor, the whole idea is that, like whenever you want to give a good feedback, it's always super super easy to give good feedback. But then like if you need to give not so good feedback, it's always just it's not very easy, especially in the Asian context, for us to do that. I think there are some people who are straight shooters who can just like you suck, man. Like, but for a lot of us, once you do that, also there's going to be a productivity hit. So radical candor, many of the techniques that are mentioned there are things that could basically make you say the same thing but use different words that don't how to say, like, shut down conversations. I think that there's a wealth of knowledge to be uh, explored there. So I think that it's worth a grab. I have read the book like I think 2-3 years ago. So my memory is a bit fuzzy. But that's what I can remember. Team of Teams is he's actually an army general, if I remember correctly. And then so the whole idea is that, like, if my memory serves me right, I might be wrong on this. It's something about him navigating a group of low performing folks and how he was able to actually turn it around to be one of the best, like a how to say, army cluster. Um, uh, that's as far as my graying hair memory tells me about it. I'll have to get back to you on it. Yeah, all right. So we have to fill in the dead air until Bruce comes back. um, all right. Well, tell you what. Let's talk a little bit about money, because who doesn't like money? So as I mentioned earlier, right, we were able to pull in some misers to help us with funding this event. So later on, we're gonna have evaluation. Like, please, send in your survey. Please send in real survey and not just to get the vouchers. So we randomly pick from people who answer the survey. Don't answer twice, okay? So randomly pick from people who answered, and yeah, we'll give you $10 grab vouchers. So yeah, please please stay and please answer the evaluations truthfully. All right, Bruce is back again. Hello.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, it's much better now.
Yeah, that's because it's
Um,
LTE. It's like on the cell phone.
Hey, thanks, Bruce, for this. Yeah, so I think we kind of left at the question about the ideal team structure.
Yeah.
And I think we forgot
Yeah,
our train of thought.
I think I mentioned the two areas is like the size of team, like how many team members you have, is it clear charter, like what is your clear goal, how do you deliver value, things like that. And I think one thing that I mentioned was that as you get bigger and you have more teams, more specialized teams, right? Inevitably, what you're going to have is you're going to have like a mobile team and a UI team and a backend team and a DevOps team. The important thing is if you go that way, where you start segmenting by functions, right? Horizontals, that you have projects and ways to have cross-functional collaboration and build things together. So that's something that you have to think about is as you scale, you gotta make sure that the teams are connected and understand the customer use case and understand like what's going on. Because I think the farther you away, like let's say you have a team that's just platform and they just like build the tools, they have no idea how the customers use it. That's when you can start getting problems, is when you're really far from the use cases and really far from the customers. So that's something to watch out for, is as you scale, you might tend to specialize too much and then you lose sort of that product value driving thought process, which is really easy to do when you're small, but as you scale and get bigger, that's something to watch out for.
Cool. Thank you, Bruce. I think it's getting a bit late on Bruce's side, actually. So maybe we can take the last two questions.
Hello.
Hi, Bruce. Can you hear us? We can see you perfectly. Did you hit the mute button?
Hey, I can't hear you.
Oh God. Okay, so I guess we'll have to fill the dead air again until Bruce can hear us.
Okay, I can hear you now.
Oh, all right,
Okay.
cool. Yeah, we were just saying that it's getting a bit late on your side, so maybe we'll take the last two questions, and then let's
Sure.
call it a day. Yeah. So maybe there's this question from Naveen actually, who was asking, how do you elevate a technical person into a management role and set them up for success?
Well, first, do they want to be a manager? I think that's the first question is, do they want to be a manager, or are you just trying to put them into management because you think that's the next step for them? So I think that's the first question to ask. The second, let's say, assume that they want to be a manager. I think you as a leader has to have pretty clear understanding and guidelines of what you expect of them as a people leader. I think what ends up happening a lot of times is people like sort of just, they kind of like throw in this all position thing where you have to do everything really well. You have to lead teams, grow teams, deal with team dynamics, manage projects, plus you have to build architecture. So that's a really big danger of, are you giving them too much? Because as a technical person, you constantly think of them as that technical leader. And are you really being fair with that position? Because I think the danger here is that you move them into a technical position. Sorry, they're technical, probably really strong technically, and then you move them into the people leadership position, expecting them to do both really well. And that, I think that's just a bad assumption and a wrong expectation. So I think you also have to be pretty clear that your expectations of them and the role is reasonable. Is that, I think early on in my career when I was doing startups, it was like, oh, the unicorn. You want the everything. They can do all the things. Talk to customers, understand the business, build technology, and manage the team. You might think they're good at it, but they're probably just bad at all of it. So I think the second one is really, really ask yourself, is it fair to have someone that needs to do everything? And if the person really wants to make the change, you have to start evaluating them as a people leader. Like, you have to start really thinking, are they executing well as a manager, not just as a technical lead? So I think that's also holding them accountable for the position. Yeah.
Cool.
I think there's another interesting question that we have within the audience that we haven't asked yet. So this is actually kind of different from the entire flow, which is, so just going to read the question. So what's your advice in terms of, for the individual contributors for managing up? How do you help your manager become a better manager?
Yeah. Managing up. This is, I'm not the greatest at this because I don't, I've been in situations where I had to deal with pretty difficult leaders or CEOs, right? And what you're really doing is managing ego and managing their feelings and managing sort of their emotions sometimes, right? You're figuring out how to communicate. Less is more. Don't get overly technical. Don't try to go too deep. You're trying to kind of sell the business value. You want to be able to like kind of have a high level summary. It depends on the leader. Some leaders are like super micromanaging technical and they want to know every detail. And so you got to understand how, what is the motivation? Where is this coming from? What is the intent, right? I was talking to someone and they were going to give a presentation, and the presentation was about why they chose a particular technology. And I'm like, this is terrible, because someone probably read, oh, I read that GraphQL is good, so tell me why we're not using it. It's just like, what? You have to really understand the intent, right? Be able to communicate effectively in an objective manner why you went a certain route. Be able to talk about why you made a decision, right? Try to take emotion out of it in yourself, even if the other person is very emotional or egotistical about it. But the best answer is, if you have to constantly manage up, I think you need to look for a new job. That's my personal opinion. I really do. And I've personally done that. I've left companies because I had to manage up, because I think that's just like a terrible waste of time. And it just shows immature leadership.
Super
I know it's not a
awesome.
great answer, but your life is short.
Yeah, if
I,
you,
I think it was a good answer. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, if you're having problem managing up, you know, Netflix is now hiring across the globe. Why not try Netflix?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Well,
I
and
think it's,
also, one thing I do want to say is that I think that is something, if I try to understand this question a little bit, is that yes, sometimes as a manager or leader, you may need to shield your team. And maybe it's not managing up. Like in our situation, it's not necessarily managing up to my manager. It's managing to the partners. It's to like work with the partners, right? Like dealing with the engineer saying something that pisses off the partner, right? And it's not necessarily managing up, but it's managing the emotion and managing the intent of the conversations. So you do have to be pretty good at that, is that you do need to know how to do that. And as a leader, your job is to protect your team, so they're not dealing with that stuff all the time. So yes, you need to be good at that. And how do you get better at that? Is you have to build relationship with the partners. You have to treat them and have one-on-ones just like you have with your team. You need to understand their motivations. You need to be a servant leader with them as well, like you would with your own team. You might have to eat your ego and think about how you can help them and be a great partner. But yeah, if you have a terrible partner who only takes advantage of you, you know, it's a tough thing. I don't have a good answer for that. Because if you have people who are actively trying to hurt you or play politics, it's a tough situation to be.
makes sense. Cool. Yeah, it's getting pretty late on Bruce's side. So just want to wrap things up. Do you want to see Bruce again? Please comment in the chat below. That's how you do it. So there's a few questions that unfortunately we don't have enough time to, you know, answer for this session. And
I have a
just
few more minutes. It's fine. I
really
can,
okay.
yeah, I
Super
can stay.
awesome. All right, let's.
I'm already in my office. Like my kids are asleep. I'm not even at home. So.
All right, then. Thank you so much. You know, we have two more questions from Akshata and Wakas actually. So let's go with. See. Let's go with Wakas first. So Wakas' question is. Wait, no, this is not the question. Sorry.
More. Yeah.
This is the one. So Wakas' question is, what's your philosophy of leadership, and what would you advise every aspiring leader to never forget? Whoa.
I have two main philosophies. I have a GitHub page if you ever want to read the full thing. But I have two strong pillars that I believe in. One is establishing psychological safety, and the second is establishing a learning culture, which is also part of establishing psychological safety. Actually, take it back. Establishing a learning culture requires high safety and high accountability. So it's actually related. So if you had to summarize the leadership philosophy, is build a learning culture by having a highly psychologically safe team and a highly accountable team. And that's it. If you have those two, it's like the core foundation of everything. And if you have to pick one, you got to start with safety first. You have to start with building the relationship, make sure people can talk openly about issues, make sure there's not jerks around stopping ideas from coming through. You gotta make sure if you as a leader is diminishing the conversation, which happens a lot as well. I'm not perfect, right? Sometimes I can talk a lot and it ruins the conversation. So I have to be careful that when I say something, it doesn't kill an idea, right? So safety is number one important. You have to be wary of the power you hold as a leader to kill a conversation accidentally. And so safety is number one, accountability is number two. You have those two, you'll have a learning culture, which means you're highly accountable and you're open to talking about your mistakes.
Cool, thank you.
So I think there's another question. So I'm just going to put another question by Shata. Does the style of leadership change when young startup versus a more established, maybe larger company?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like, look, early on, I've done 2 startups, right? And both times I wrote the code, I helped build the team. I had to be good at all things, right? And as you scale, the job changes. And sometimes the problem is the person doesn't change. And then they end up having a terrible team. So you might have like the right person for a early stage startup, and they might be terrible at a mid stage or late stage, right? I heard this analogy of like, you have like the Delta Force, you have the special forces, you have the army, and then you have the police. And these are the 3 types of people you have. And so sometimes you have a small team, superstars come in, do a bunch of stuff, lay the foundation, and then leave. And then the army comes in and builds it and iterates and whatever. It eventually goes into maintenance mode, and now it's just, So I think the stage of startup, the stage of your business, where you're at as a business, you have to lead and deal with different things. And so absolutely. I think probably one of the biggest ones I remember personally is just I had to be that mixed mode more when I was in a startup, right? I was writing the code plus I was building the team. And like sometimes you just can't avoid that. But as you grow, and this is the biggest fallacy, is as you grow, you can't be the person writing the code anymore. You have to decide. You either want to be the programmer or you want to be the people leader. And you have to start choosing, right? So as you scale, you have to really be careful about the role you want to take on. Yeah.
So Bruce, I guess just a follow-up question. You mentioned about, writing less and less code. And I'm pretty sure this is a challenge that a lot of engineers run into, whereby the less code you write, the less familiar you are with what's going on. And the less familiar you are in what's going on, the less confidence you have in yourself as a good engineer. So how do you balance the kind of journey going towards management and leadership role?
Yeah, I mean, it's a struggle I have, right? Like I haven't written a single piece of code at Netflix, and I've never built software here. I've never launched software here. And so, yeah, it's tough. How do you stay and be we call it credible technical advisor, right? But here's the problem. And my boss and I talked about this. Like, how do I prioritize my time? Do you want me coding? I could do it, but then I'm going to have less time doing one-on-ones. I'm going to have less time doing partner relationships. I'm going to have less time, writing documents and stuff like that. So I think, yes, you need to know sort of from a high level the technology, but to believe that you have to know the day-to-day, like exact lines of code being written, I think diminishes the importance of what each person does. Like it's kind of presupposing that to be a good manager, you also have to be a good engineer, which then just diminishes the role of what the manager is supposed to do, right? The manager is the organizational architect. That is their job. So what are you giving up by having that person be an awesome technical architect? Are they really monitoring the team? Do they know what's going on? Do they look at the personalities? Are they doing the one-on-ones? Are you working with partners? Are you managing up, right? Like, I think that's a dangerous line of thought, because it's kind of like a dig on a manager, right? Like, oh, you can't be really good unless you know how to write code. Well, I could tell you I've met some really good code writers, but they're not great at organizational architecture. And they're not necessarily great at having one-on-ones. And they're not necessarily great at partner communication. And they're not necessarily great at other skills, right? So, but that's not their job, right? That's not what they're supposed to do. So I just be very careful about that line of thinking, just because I think it's a narrow scope. I think underneath that basically is kind of like a silent jab. Like, well, you're not a real person because you don't know how to write code.
Makes sense. Thanks.
We have one last question. Okay, so just to read off the question, how do I, as an individual contributor, be aware of myself while minimizing reliance on the manager's feedback? If you can share any personal experiences.
Mm.
Okay, let me flash the question. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's hard. Like, I think, this is more like a philosophical question, right? Are you as a person self-aware of your own flaws? I think sometimes it's hard to be, right? You sometimes need people to tell you the problems that you have, right? But a skill is, think about feedback that you would give to, I did, like earlier I did a session, right? And I immediately was like, oh man, I totally messed up. I did 1, 2, 3 things wrong. And so I think one thing you can do is try to give yourself real critical feedback on like how you could have improved. But the problem is, like, you can't just grow on your own, right? You need to learn from someone. You need to read books. You need to have a mentor. You need to talk to your manager. You need to have people who have skills that can like bring out the best in you and to push you to think differently, right? So I think reliance on manager is not a weakness, right? That's kind of their job, is to like really help provide you feedback. And while it's great that you are able to give and be self-critical, I think we all have blind spots, right? We just have things that we can't see in ourselves. And so Netflix, for instance, is really, really a foundational thing of our culture, is being candid with each other and providing feedback and giving the feedback. Because sometimes people don't even know what's happening. So I think while you could practice learning and growing yourself and being self-aware, sure, I think it'd be better to be able to receive feedback. That's an even stronger skill, is can you take feedback from someone, receive it, and then figure out how to improve? Because taking critical feedback is super hard. It like damages your ego a little bit. And so I would improve that skill just as much as trying to be self-critical.
All right,
That's
super
awesome,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the last question for today. Bruce, thank you so much for your time. I think the audience they really enjoyed this time. This is the most active YouTube live chat that we have seen so far. Do you have any final words for the audience before we close?
Yeah, I think there's a lot going on here, right? Obviously, it's very hard to summarize sort of many years of learning and mistakes and failing in like a 20-minute presentation and a 2-hour info session. And so I think what's important is that, we're all learning, right? I'm not a great, I'll tell you, I don't think I'm like necessarily a great manager. I can always be better, and I can be a better leader. And so I think staying humble and hungry and really think about how you can grow and never be satisfied about where you're at, no matter where you're at, I think will help you and take you a long way. And seek out people, right? Like seek out people, seek out mentors, work with each other, read books, learn, try to grow. And I think the last thing is people leadership really is its own thing. You have to get good at it, and it took me many years to get decent at it, right? And I was a very bad manager before, I can tell you that. And so that takes experience and it takes time, and it is a different career path, and so I think really understand that. I think sometimes people think when early on a manager gives me more power, a manager will give me more prestige, manager will make me more money, and that's just like terrible reasons to go into leadership, right? So like be critical about why you want to be a leader, why you want to be a people leader. Some of these questions I see, it's sort of like always about the next step, about the ladder. And you got to really be careful that don't think of this as necessarily a ladder. You can have different ways of growing your career, right? And people leadership is hard. When you have to let someone go, and I've done it a few times, really, really hard, right? And I never enjoy it, even when it's someone that I know needs to be like exited, right? So be careful about what you wish for. It's not all rosy, I can tell you that.
Super cool. Thank you so much, Bruce, once again.
Yeah.
And
Thanks, everyone.
yeah, yay, round of applause. Even if we are the only ones uploading in the video.
Yeah, it's weird. I can't see anyone, just you two. So
Yeah. All right. So to just kind of close things off, Bruce has mentioned, his GitHub account a few times. This is his GitHub account, and this is, you can go to this link, learn a bit more about his philosophy, his stuff, and the codes he checked in. All of things are there. So
yeah,
again.
there's a bunch of books I reference actually. Yeah, lots of articles I've read. Yeah, I have a Trello board with just like a crap ton of articles I've read, and some that I haven't read yet. So it's at the bottom. There's a bunch of books and articles that I've read that's really kind of changed my philosophy or helped my philosophy around leadership. So I encourage you guys to look at that list. Yeah.
Super cool.
Awesome.
All right, and then comes the bribe. So again, as I mentioned, we are looking for not looking for, but like we do appreciate surveys response. So please, go to the link and give us your super honest feedback, and we'll randomly choose a few winners. And please answer only once, okay? Like we don't want to see the same email all over again, and don't use different emails for the same person. Just try to be fair. All right. So that's pretty much the end. Again, once again, thank you for our sponsor, Hubble, for giving us money to actually give away. So we end up not earning anything, but that's okay. Hope that everyone have fun and have a great day. And for Bruce, have a very good night. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.